Hello, I'm Jean Pete, and I welcome you back to our show, Better Living. Better Living is brought to you by the Homestead Hope Foundation and is sponsored by Homestead Hospice, where commitment to education and premier hospice care helps patients and families through life's most important journey. Thank you for joining us again this week. We have another great guest with us today. I'm sitting here with Mr. Robert Ortega from Southern Pines Assisted Living Facility. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Do you want the listeners to know you as Mr. Ortega, Robert, Rob? How do we go today?
Rob will do.
Okay.
We're all family.
Rob has been on some of my previous shows in the past few years, and today we have very important information to share with you about assisted living facilities, what to look for, how important it is to take a tour of the facility when deciding what is the best placement for your loved one. We're going to give you some tips on some great questions to ask and things to look for. And we're going to discuss recent legislative changes here in the state of Georgia that are impacting assisted living facilities and personal care homes and may impact your decision on where to place your loved one. Is there anything I missed, Rob?
No, that sounds like a great topic.
Okay. Before we get into this topic, we've done some shows in the past with personal care home owners too. Lots of great information. So thank you so much for being here today, because I want to give the assisted living facility perspective as well. And it's so confusing to people who aren't in our industry, and I'm confused and I'm in our industry.
Right.
So I appreciate you being here today.
Well, I'm going to try to not be confused, because due to some recent changes, it's confusing.
I know. So we'll clear the waters there. But first, let's talk about you. How did you get involved in the assisted living facility arena, and what is it that you do, and a little bit about Southern Pines?
Sure. I actually grew up around it. My stepmom ran facilities for years. And back in 2001, her and my dad went ahead and purchased a facility in Commerce. So about that time, I joined the Marines, spent 5 years in and came back out. And my dad took over the facility, and he became sick about 4 years ago, and I started running it full time, and then I took over ownership. So in that time, growing up around it, I was familiar with little policy and procedure stuff, but there's more or less hearts and minds type stuff going into the buildings, doing stuff for the residents, keeping up building maintenance, that kind of stuff. Getting involved in the actual business end of it and organizations, and really getting involved in the community with the needs of elder care and everything happened about 5 years ago. And that's actually been the rewarding part, because that's what it's all about. So that's how I got into it. And now, as an owner-operator, I got a great staff that's been in place for years. My two managers have been there since we have owned the place. My second shift supervisor's been there since '96. So I got a great team that works with me. And, we all have our piece of the puzzle that we bring to it. And we run a really tight ship.
And I know that you, because we've known each other for years now, Rob, I know that you're an advocate, and you had said it earlier, but you sort of skimmed over it, that really and truly your heart is in making sure these people have a voice, and you're very involved politically on the legislative changes in the front that affects, how that affects the folks coming into assisted living facilities.
Exactly. You run into all kinds of issues when you're talking about care of elders. You see on the news all the time people trying to take advantage of elders. A lot of times, when you start getting at the high age, late 70s, 80s, 90s, mental, cognitive functions, all that kind of stuff declines, and it's easy to take advantage. I actually noticed that dealing with families. If somebody has dementia or Alzheimer's, but they have a pension income, Social Security income, investment income, assets, all of a sudden everybody's fighting for who's going to take care of grandma or grandpa. When the reality is the care is little on some of these folks' minds. It's about who controls the money. So being involved in assisted living and getting to know my residents and their backgrounds and the families, I really started getting into advocacy work. And on the flip side, a lot of times government entities come in and they have a lot of good ideas as to how to protect these residents, and everything is good intentions. But the problem is when somebody's trying to implement policies and procedures from afar with not really understanding how the business works and how the interaction with the family and residents works, sometimes there can be a little backlash and issues arise. So I've got involved in policy making, the actual politics of it, and working with the commission and Department of Human Services and those different entities to try to make sure that they understand that they understand where I'm coming from, and I understand where they're coming from.
And we give a voice to, or we give stress on how this impacts
Right.
the residents and their family members.
Right, exactly. I think a lot of people don't realize this is a business, so it has to be ran like a business. And people think that business people approach it where it's just about money. What they don't understand is these things have to be run really streamlined and with resident focus. So if a law is passed that affects revenue, that revenue is for the residents. It's for their care. We provide 3 meals a day, snacks, 2 planned snacks a day with access to food 24 hours. We have 24-hour caregivers. I run housekeeper 7 days a week.
I have questions on all of these
Right.
things. And, as I said early on, excuse me, as I said early on, I've had guests here from personal care homes in the past, and we've talked about the difference now here in Georgia. Important information for everybody around the country, but specific to Georgia, the changes in legislation and how that affects how a facility is even labeled anymore, whether it's an
Right.
assisted living or a personal care home. So as not to confuse the audience that's listening to us today, can I ask you to just kind of take a step back
Yep.
and let's talk about what is an assisted living facility versus a personal care home, and then we'll talk about why it's important to know the difference when you're looking for a facility for your loved one.
Okay. It gets a little convoluted. I'll try to explain it the best I actually understand it, because a lot of these law changes are recent, and unfortunately, a lot of them aren't cut and dry. It's whoever the inspector is, how they interpret them. I'm actually in the process of going through an inspection right now, so I've become even more familiar based on what the law says, but how they're interpreting it over at the state level. Basically, an assisted living facility now is defined as a facility that's approved for 25 beds or more. You have memory care facilities, which upon approval, there's really no size restriction on them. It's just a requirements for what the level of care they have to provide. So generally, they're a little bit bigger because care is more in depth, and it takes a little bit more to handle memory care. And then you have personal care homes are being defined as 24 rooms or less now. Before these changes arised, personal care homes, I believe, were 6 beds or less. And I interchange beds and rooms, but the intention's beds, because you can have semi-private rooms.
Okay, so memory care facilities can be either an assisted living or a personal care home. Everything is based on size. If you're 25 beds or more,
Assisted
you
living.
must be an ALF.
Right.
If you're 24 or less, you can choose whether you want to be coded as an ALF or a personal care home.
No, you
If
can't.
you meet regs?
You can't choose 24 beds or less. You are a personal care home,
Okay.
but you can get approval for memory care, which basically they set out a set of criteria, which ironically is the same as assisted living, with a few additional things like locked doors, outdoor area that's fenced or housed, so you eliminate wandering risks and things of that nature. So in my situation, I'm 24 beds. So I'm defined now as a personal care home. I've operated since '96 as an assisted living facility, but I am an approved memory care facility. So I deal with different levels of Alzheimer's, dementia, or any other kind of mental issues. When I say mental, we can do an older adult that suffers from any sort of mental retardation, anything like that. I don't get into schizophrenia or anything that could negatively impact physically or violence, anything like that. But so being 24 beds or less, I'm defined as a personal care home, but I exist under the regulations of assisted living, but I'm only allowed to handle people that are considered memory care. I know.
I'm so thoroughly confused,
that-
so I'm sure our audience is right now as well.
Well, it's funny that you're confused. Try dealing with a state inspector.
So let's kind of, like I said, clear the waters a little bit.
Right.
If I have a loved one, let's say they have dementia,
Yes.
and I recognize that I cannot safely care for them in my home anymore, I'm afraid they're going to wander. I'm afraid they're going to leave the oven on when I go to work during the day. I know I need help and need to place them somewhere.
Right.
How do I decide? I know I want a memory care unit because my loved one has dementia. Okay. So now I'm faced with, do I choose a personal care home memory care unit or do I go to an assisted living facility memory care unit? What are the pros and cons?
Well, there are different pros and cons. There are facilities out there, large ones, that have an assisted living area that is really nothing more than like a 55 and older community, but it gets into ADLs, which are activities of daily living. So they will help with bathing, feeding, stuff like that. But the people's minds are sound. And what they'll do is they'll section off an area that's secured, and that'll be full memory care. And a lot of times in those facilities, that area has its own common areas. It's totally cordoned off.
And there's no interaction between the two groups.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And that's to eliminate risks of wandering and things like that. The other facilities, there's facilities like mine, which are 100% memory care. So we bring people in at all different levels. Now, the advantage to that, and I'm not saying these other facilities that have cordoned off areas are bad. There's a lot of great ones out there. But the advantage to a facility like mine is the entire facility is secured. So all of my doors and my utility wings are secured to the kitchen, to the electrical room, and all that kind of stuff. So if somebody wanders in my building, they can do it freely without risk of injury or being lost or anything like that. So for somebody looking for a memory care facility, I like that. I think that's pretty neat. You can come inside my facility and there's not a door over here with the chicken wire glass, so to speak, and you see, you look down there and it looks very institutionalized. You come into a facility that the entire facility is memory care, and it's like any other place. You just keep all the outside doors locked.
Mm-hmm. I see. Okay, and then you had mentioned outdoor space.
Right.
Does every memory care facility have an outdoor space that's cordoned off to keep them safe but allow them to go outside?
Yeah, there's actually a requirement that a facility or community at any level has to have outdoor living space. And I'm perfectly okay with that because people, you got to get your vitamin D. You got to go outside and walk around. It gives families an opportunity to interact in nature. Nature is actually very good for folks with memory diseases. It's calming, it's relaxing, it's soothing, and the fresh air, I don't know if there's anything scientific behind fresh air, but it's just nice.
It just makes you feel better.
Exactly.
When you're sick and you're in the house, you can't wait to feel better and just get outside.
Exactly. So what happens is memory care, they're supposed to be sealed off. And when I say sealed, either locked, fenced, or a lot of newer facilities that are being built with central courtyards. That way, there is no chance of any kind of wandering risk, and they're actually beautiful. Eventually, I'd like to do that with my facility if I add on to it.
Okay, so I do want to get more into, because we opened the show with all of the changes in legislation here in Georgia, and we'll get to that. I promise for all of the folks listening, it's very important that you know how that's going to impact your decision. However, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. Okay. Let's walk someone through. You're at the point where your loved one needs to be placed. Right. You're feeling guilty. You just can't do it. They want to stay at home. You got to take that leap and just investigate, research. You haven't made the decision yet, but at least go out there and investigate a few options to inform yourself and feel better about your decision. So when you have folks in that phase right there, how do you help them?
Well, a lot of times that phase, a family will recognize that there's an issue. And that's about the time that they take them to the doctor for testing to find out if there is a memory issue, Alzheimer's, dementia. If that diagnosis is given, in the beginning, it's not too bad. They can stay at home. But now we're at that point where they got to go somewhere. I recommend a few things. A doctor that deals in geriatrics, which is generally who you're going to see in that situation, should have some recommendations in the community. there are laws governing them steering people, but they should have a list, at least 3 or 4 or 5 in the area that are good options. And if a doctor's recommending them, or if they're on his list, and generally it's probably a place that's pretty solid. The other is organizations and companies that do placement. There's a few out there, A Place for Mom, assisted living locators. You can Google elder care placement, assisted living, anything like that, and it'll pop up different companies that do placement. These companies are free of service. They actually charge the facility after somebody moves in. So you don't have to go into it with the fear of you're going to be steered somewhere, because the facility that your loved one eventually winds up in takes care of that for you. So for you, that burden is gone. Most of them have social workers employed, or highly trained individuals that know these facilities. They work in the community and they understand what you're going through. They've done it a lot. So you can explain where your loved one is with their functions, with their mental disease, or if there's nothing wrong with them mentally, it's just they have unsteady gait, they're a fall risk, or they can't stay at home anymore. They can help you with that and find the appropriate place. And generally, they give you a list, sort of like what a doctor would do. They give you 4 or 5 places, or all the places that are available, and they'll ask you if you'd like these facilities to call you, so you can set up tours and go check them out.
And do the doctors then go to facilities and tour them so they've seen them, or do they just hear what the facilities are that some of their patients have gone to in the past?
A lot of the doctors come in. We work with a few doctors in my facility, and they come in about monthly or as needed to see the residents, because they maintain those patients. And so the patient will move into a facility, they'll become a resident in, say, a place like mine, and the doctor's still their doctor. So a lot of the doctors will do site visits from time to time. So they become familiar with the managers, and they become familiar with the building. They become familiar with the environment, cleanliness, and what we do. So
again, you're out in Mayfield.
Maysville.
Sorry, Maysville.
That's okay.
Which is over near Commerce.
Yes, right off 85.
Okay, because I'm worried a little bit that if you get more into the Atlanta area, maybe those doctors haven't really been to those facilities. But maybe outside of the city, you're going to be more prone to have doctors that are visiting the facilities. And the reason for my point on that is you always want to get a list.
Yes.
But you have to be the advocate for your loved one. So
Yes.
make sure you do your due diligence, educate yourself, inform yourself, ask the right questions.
Right.
Take the lead if someone gives you a list, but you still have got to figure out what's the best place for my loved one.
Right. And to be honest with you, that's why I'm a big fan of the location services, because the ones I've dealt with, they come into your facility, they talk to you, they look around, they tour, they see what your rates are, what you have to offer, and they'll approve you to be on their list because their reputation is on the line also. They don't want to have you on their list as a recommended facility or community. They send somebody over there, and it's a total disaster.
And those are places like you mentioned.
Right. Just the biggest one is A Place for Mom.
Mm-hmm.
There's assisted living locators. I've worked with them around the Atlanta area, and there's others. There's several of them. But they will work with you hand in hand. They're trustworthy people, and they don't steer. They give you a list.
And they're nationwide. So for our
Yes.
audiences in Phoenix and the Gulf Coast, New Orleans, Mississippi, Alabama, same thing. You can call A Place for Mom, assisted living locators. They will help you get a list of good facilities in your area.
Yeah, and their reps are local. They do it.
Right.
They do it by region, very small regions. So you're not going to call one of these national companies, get a call center in Minnesota or something, and they're going to have some generic list that comes up on their computer screen and steer you somewhere. You will get sent to a rep in that area that's been in these facilities that can speak with you in an educated manner and point you in the right direction.
So now let's bring them to the tour.
Okay.
Let's help folks compile a list of items that they should be looking for when they walk into a facility.
Okay.
What are some things that you can offer to help them prepare for their tour?
I am a little different. A lot of facilities prefer to set up tours. And I actually like setting up tours. But what I recommend people is do a site visit. Stop in, drop by. No facility is perfect. Neither is even mine. So we're not going to be perfect all the time. So stop by, see what they're like in the raw. Basically functioning day to day when you're not there, but your mom or grandmother or grandfather or someone is there. This is what you see, and ask to speak to a manager. You can get a lot of feel for the community if you come in, if there are a nurse's aide that greets you, ask you how they can help you, things like that. That gives you a good feel for the community. You ask to see a manager or supervisor, make sure they're in, that you can talk to them. The bigger places have marketing directors, so you might get a hold of a marketing director that they can show you around, and that's what they do. So I recommend that. If you see things that may disturb you or you may not like, but you get an overall good vibe, stop in again. I recommend 2 visits. I always recommend 2 visits. Everybody has a bad day, especially at different times of the season when you come in and the flu may go around the building or something like that. That happens.
Or you might have had a couple of people pass away, and
right.
the staff's just not quite themselves that day.
Exactly.
Right.
So I recommend a couple of visits. If you still have a good vibe and you like it then set up an appointment with the administrator, marketing director, executive director, whoever's in charge or does that, and then you can sit down and get real in depth. You can ask the tough questions, find out exactly how it's going to be, go over pricing structure and things like that.
I love what you said, though, about checking out how the caregiver, because a lot of times with the home health aides, even though they're in a facility, they're not home health, but that's what we call them, the aides.
Right.
They are the key, because they're the ones interacting with the residents on a daily basis the most.
Yes.
So although it's great to talk to a marketing director, because they're going to have a lot of answers to your questions,
right.
You really want to observe those
right.
caregivers and how they interact with those residents while you're walking down the halls and getting answers to your questions.
You're exactly right. I call them my Marine background kind of runs into my new career, my new life. I call them, they're on the front line. Those are the people that are in it. They deal with the residents every day, 24 hours a day. They deal with the families directly. And if they have a bad attitude, then that kind of gives you a vibe of the culture of the facility. I have no patience for that at all. Everybody has a bad day. I will send people home if they're having a bad day because I understand the nature of this business. I understand it can be emotional, and I understand what my staff is dealing with. So I try to keep my culture is resident focused. It's about keeping them their mind free, their mind healthy, body healthy, keeping things clean, making sure they're occupied in a way that's satisfactory for them. If you have a fellow that likes to read, make sure he has books. Again.
And we've talked about that before because I know with your military background, how you manage and how great I think that is in terms of how you manage a facility. So that's wonderful. I do think a key topic here is some of the things that you might even want to ask the caregiver even while you're on the tour with the marketing director, some of those questions. And we do have to take a quick break, but there's so many more details and people that you want to talk to and things you want to think about and questions that we want to help you formulate so that when you're taking a tour in a facility, you are 100% prepared to get the answers you need to make the right decision for your loved one. So stay with us here. We have to take a quick break, but we will be right back to inform you about those important topics. Hello, I'm Jean Pete, and I welcome you back to our show, Better Living. Better Living is brought to you by the Homestead Hope Foundation and is sponsored by Homestead Hospice, where commitment to education and premier hospice care helps patients and families through life's most important journey. We're back here with Mr. Robert Ortega of Southern Pines Assisted Living Facility in Maysville, Georgia. Before we get into all of the questions, because we did tell you to hang back and stay with us because we have a lot of important information to share with you regarding getting ready to have a tour in a facility to make sure you're making the right decision for your loved one. But before I get involved in that and forget, can you give your contact information in case anybody is in the Maysville area and wants to come and see you at a Southern Pines Assisted Living?
Sure. Obviously, we're open 24 hours a day, so our phone number is 706-652-2600. You can call us any time of day, and we'll if a manager is not on duty, if it's in the evening, we'll definitely get back with you first thing in the morning. And we're off exit 147 on 85 at 258 College Avenue in Maysville, Georgia, right by Commerce. Great.
So right before the break, we talked about how important those caregivers are. They're interacting with residents all day long. They can sometimes be, and they've been called the angels of care, and as you call them, the front line.
Yes.
So when someone is touring a facility, And if it's a large, pretty hotel-like looking facility, they're probably going to get a marketing director who's very adept at answering questions about the facility and the ownership and all of the politically correct answers.
Right.
But I, like you, am very, very much an advocate of talking to those caregivers because they're the ones that are going to be helping your loved one the most.
Right.
So, that being said, I have some thoughts, but I wanted to get some of your thoughts on what might be some good questions to ask a caregiver if you're walking down the hall and someone is there interacting with a patient or a resident.
That's actually a tough one because I know my staff, they're pretty streamlined. And the one thing that I will say when you interact with a staff member, you got to remember what these folks do every day. I mean, they are toileting, they are bathing, they are helping people get dressed, helping them get undressed. They're helping feeding if it's if it's very advanced care. They do some stuff that the average person would cringe. I mean, these people are wonderful. So if you run into them in a hall and you say hello and they greet you with a smile and they are very personable, then that gives you an idea of the culture of that facility and the type of people they employ, because the chances are that person has been through a lot that day. And if they can still put that smile on the face and be good to you, then that kind of tells you how they're trained and the type of personalities that they bring in. And when you do run into them, ask some simple questions. Ask them how the food was today, little conversation stuff to get a vibe. I'm a big proponent of culture. How's the culture? Anybody can become robots. Anybody can say we do this, 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 and this, and we're done. But if you have true caregivers that love what they do, and they do it because no one's getting rich in this industry as a caregiver. So when they're in there doing that kind of stuff, they're doing it because they love to, and that's what that's the vibe you have to get. I know it sounds like a generic answer, and it's not very detailed, but it's true. But I agree with you. Exactly, it's true.
But something that comes to mind, because I'm putting myself in the situation of someone taking a tour for a loved one, and I have lived with an aunt who had Alzheimer's, and one of the things that I do in my work, in my life, in my conversations with my children is I might ask them how they would handle situations that I'm struggling with to help me. So if I'm in a building and I'm touring because I have a loved one with dementia, and my biggest issue is getting them to take a shower or a bath. One of the things I might offer our listeners is when you're talking to the caregiver and you're going down the hall, hi, how are you? Yes, I'm looking at this facility for my loved one. I noticed you were talking to so-and-so. I think I'm going to be placing them, but in the meantime, I'm really struggling with blah, blah, blah. Do you have any tips for me? And that's going to give you a very good indication. Their answer, how they answer, their passion for their answer, it's going to give you a very good indication of that worker in that facility.
Exactly. That's a phenomenal question. You can ask something simple, steer them in that direction, and then say, one of the biggest issues I have is mom or dad has trouble getting up out of the recliner.
Perfect.
And I don't want to lift them in a way that hurts them. What is a good way to lift them? It's just me at the house, and we're looking for facilities. We maybe here, maybe somewhere else, but this is going to happen soon. But how can I do that in the meantime?
Mm-hmm.
And see if they're properly trained. They can demonstrate or show you or describe it. That's very important because that happens. The other thing is agitation, especially when you get into older adults that have some different level of memory issues. And let's be honest, the majority, once you get over a certain age, I think it's 85, the majority of adults at that age suffer from some level of memory disease, whether it's very slight dementia or it goes into very in-depth Alzheimer's. You have to deal with that kind of stuff. So let's say you deal with agitation. Ask that caregiver, how do you deal with agitation? And they may get into saying, you talk them down, start talking about things from the past. You ask them what they dreamt about last night. Take their mind off of it. Get that kind of feel to see if they really are into it and they care, they've been trained, and they know how to deal with personalities. Little things like that are important. It gives you an idea of their training and they're the actual caregiver's personality who will be taking care of your loved one while you're away.
Very good information. So that's some good tips for getting an insider's view on how your loved one's going to be cared for in the facility.
Right.
Let's talk, because there's so many other components that you have to make a decision on. One being, very important to all of us, food. Tell us
Yes.
about the differences between all of the different facilities and the choices that they would have and how Southern Pines handles that.
There are some major differences. And when I say major, I don't mean good or bad. I'm just talking about what those facilities are capable of handling. You can go into some of these big, beautiful places, and they will have 3, 4, 5-star chefs in there. They will have planned meals with all fresh vegetables. Some of them, actually, I've heard out west, are starting getting into the grown locally food serving and things of that nature. You might deal with that all the way down to a 6 or 8 room facility that has the owner lives on site and they do the cooking. So it's just regular down home cooking, and there's everything in between. I know at our facility we're about right in the middle. We don't have the type of residents and we don't have the size that can handle one of these phenomenal chefs. But at the same time, we can go a little bit more in depth than the manager also doing some cooking. So we have 2 cooks that we have on rotation to do a phenomenal job. One part-time owns a catering company. The other one's just a phenomenal cook. And so what we do is we go shop and we actually buy the things. For our facility, we don't have the stuff trucked in through Cisco or one of these other companies. We do all the shopping at Sam's Club, so they get good brand name quality stuff that you can expect to have in your house. And then we go to local stores to pick up perishables, vegetables, milk, stuff like that that you can't do monthly. So everything in our place is comparable to what you get at home. And the cooks, we do a monthly menu planning. That's actually a requirement of the state. So no matter what level of food that you get, there will be a monthly menu. So you have an expectation what you're going to get. And the other issue is we do a lot with diabetics. And when you get in advanced stages of memory care, you have issues with chewing and swallowing and things like that. So what we do is we generally on our menu will have 2 different styles of food. We'll have stuff that's real easy to eat. There can be pureed or soups or things like that for the folks that can't swallow or have issues like that. And then we have the other side of the menu, which is good solid. I mean, we do pork chops, roasts, meatloafs, chickens, all kinds of stuff like that. And that's for the folks that are that can eat normally like you and I. One thing we don't do is we don't get into heavily salted foods or things that could affect diabetics, because diabetes at different levels is pretty prevalent in older adults.
And when folks are taking a tour, can they test your food?
Yeah. Some facilities are charged, maybe $2, $3, $4, $5 when they come in. And I understand that if you have a large facility where there's a lot of traffic coming in and out. At mine, we don't. If we tell the residents' families you can come in and eat anytime. If they come in for a tour and they'd like to have a meal, we don't have an issue with that at all.
And I think that's very important. If you're touring a facility to try to determine if this is the right place for your loved one,
right,
you should taste the food before you decide whether that's the right place for your loved one.
Exactly. And one thing we will do is we'll work with the residents' personal needs. We have a fella actually moving in tomorrow who he's diabetic, and he only drinks soy milk, and he loves Raisin Bran. And we were told that. So now when we do our monthly shopping, soy milk and Raisin Bran is going to be on the list.
That's wonderful. That was my next question. Do you customize your ordering or your shopping based upon some maybe resident requests?
Right.
So you do.
We will do that. We'll do it to a point. A resident's not going to have their own special menu over here, but if there's some things that the residents like, we'll pick them up. It's part of the service. What we want to do is make them feel at home. And if for the past 50 years or 80 years, like this fella, he's been eating his soy milk with Raisin Bran, we're not going to stop him. We're not going to stop him from eating soy milk and Raisin Bran. We'll go pick it up.
But an important question for a loved one touring a facility, because not all facilities are going to have that flexibility, because you all are doing the shopping yourself.
Exactly.
And I wouldn't have even thought of that. Is it a truck that comes in monthly, or are they going locally? Would not have even thought of that. So great information and good questions for folks to get ready to ask when they go to a tour.
And I will say, I think we may be out of the ordinary for that. It started out actually as for cost, because I have one facility, so I don't have buying power of a major company. So it's hard for me to negotiate with companies like Cisco and all that. So what we found is we have to get their lower tier ordering, and the food quality wasn't as good. So what we do is we go to Sam's Club. We can actually fax in an order. They package everything up, and they have it ready to go. All I got to do is put it on the in the cargo van, and take it to the community. So that is something we do that may be unique. I don't know of many other facilities that do that, but for us, it's the best of both worlds. It's very cost effective, but at the same time, we're getting the best quality food.
That's great.
Right.
Okay, so that's great. Now, what about dining times? Are there set times where they have dinners, or is it open whenever? How does that work with families that might work later or can only come at 5? I don't know.
We have set dining times. Most communities do have set dining times.
Okay.
Yes. It keeps things, when you're cooking for a lot of people, like almost in a restaurant type fashion, you have to do that because you're preparing a lot of food at one time. And
that's typical of these facilities.
Yeah, that's across the board. Now, one thing we will do, most facilities will do, if let's say Grandpa doesn't feel good or he's not feeling social, he doesn't want to come out to dine, we will take it to their room. We'll make a tray, take it down to the room. Some places actually charge for that. They'll charge $1, $2, $5 per trip to a room.
Another important question to ask before you make your decision.
Exactly. For us, it's included. It's not that big a deal. It takes a little bit more time, but it's not really an issue because the way we look at it and the way we approach things, if that makes your grandpa happy, so grandpa's going to be happy the rest of the day, and a lack of bad attitude won't filter throughout the community and everybody's happy, to us it's worth it.
Yeah, I would imagine that.
Right.
Okay, so we talked about food. Let's talk about activities.
Okay.
I'm just thinking about my own mother. She's very social. She's very active. If she were to be placed into a facility, then I would look at specific things to match her style. So what are some typical activities that an assisted living or a personal care home would offer?
A lot of them, they do a few different things. A memory care facility like mine will get into storytelling's big, doing some writing, if they're still able to write about things happening in the past, because you're trying to basically exercise the brain, get it working, try to work on memory. We'll do some actual physical things. Something as simple as hitting around a beach ball, almost like you're at a concert, but that allows them to move, get the arms moving. A lot of folks are in wheelchairs at this point, so it allows at least the areas of their body that is still mobile to stay mobile and move around. If the weather's good, we'll go outside, do some nature watching, try to pick out birds, stuff like that.
What about gardening? Because I would imagine, a lot of people putter around their yards.
Yes.
And garden. And I think it would be very important to have a garden that the residents can keep up in these facilities.
There a lot of places do that. Some of them have pretty extensive ones. I will just go ahead and say this. A fellow Neil runs the Morningside up in Gainesville, and he has won awards for the salsa he makes from the peppers and tomatoes and stuff they grow in the garden there.
Oh, that's great.
I mean, it's phenomenal. And every year what they do is they jar it all up and they give it to the resident families. It's not a commercial thing. They don't sell anything. The idea is the residents made that. They grew it.
That's great.
They made it, and they jar it themselves, and they give it to their families. It's a neat thing they do every year, and he does other stuff like that. A lot of facilities do that kind of stuff.
And even too, I want to take this to the next level too, because I'm trying to empower. Better living is about educating and informing families and their patients and their loved ones about all aspects of senior living, so that they can be informed and make the right choices for them. So this is all great information, but I also want to empower people to take it to the next level. I remember when I was interviewing at colleges. One of the colleges was a little bit smaller, and I was asking them if they had certain programs, and the answer was, we don't have that, but you know what? We would help you. We have a committee. We would help you get that going if that's something you were interested in. So I'm sure if a family came in and gardening was this specialty and they had a love for it, those are some things to ask as well. Would this be something we could implement? Right. Just because they don't have it doesn't mean it has to stay that way.
Exactly. And the chances are you'll get little pushback. We take suggestions all the time and try to implement things where we can. When you start to get in advanced stages of memory care, it becomes really tough to get into some activities just because of people just don't have the ability anymore. But when you get into an assisted living facility where people are still very active and mobile, there's actually not much you can do. Like the gardening, you can get into painting. There's some places that have artists come in that do almost, You know that new phenomenon going around. You go in and take your girlfriends and drink wine and paint. They do there's a lot of that going on now in facilities. I think it's phenomenal.
Good to know I'll still be drinking wine and painting when I'm in a facility.
Well, I won't go in depth to say that they're drinking wine. You have to ask that facility if that's part of the deal. But they do things like that, classes. And so it's really neat. One of the things we do is sing-alongs. We have Wednesday, we work with a local church in the area that brings people in, and they'll sing songs, hymnals, other country songs, if whatever the residents can make requests, and if they know it, they'll play it, and they bring all their instruments and everything in. It's really neat. It's almost like a concert every Wednesday.
That's great.
Right.
That's great. Okay, good. So we talked a lot about some questions they can ask in terms of care, questions regarding food and dining and activities, some questions they can ask the staff. Let's talk about staffing ratios, because you did mention if someone came in at night and maybe your manager wasn't on duty. This is a big hot button for me, because not all facilities are alike.
Right.
So what does a staffing ratio look like during the day versus at night for the different types of facilities, to the best of your knowledge?
There actually is a specific ratio minimum. I think it's one staff member per, I think it's 16 or 17 residents. Don't quote me on that. It's in that range. But depending on the state inspector and depending on the level of care that you deal with, I mean, you have to make a judgment call. That is the minimum. And most of the time in life, the minimum is just that. So you have to go ahead and say, all right, I have a lot of residents here that mobility is not an issue. If there's a fire, I need to get them out. Or if you have people that are fall risks, I can't have one person run around the floor with 15 people if 3 of them are fall risks. So facilities will generally staff up to what's required to give proper care to the residents. If you notice that that's a problem, one of the ways to notice that's a problem is if you come into a facility and it's a ghost town. I've actually done that. There are places that are like that. That's normally the first indication that possibly staffing is not at the forefront of their minds.
And I think it's so important to visit facilities at night.
Exactly.
Because during the day, it's a whole different picture. And when I say at night, I don't mean the middle of the night either.
Right.
You could be talking 8:30, 9 o'clock at night.
Exactly. Some places run 2 shifts. They'll run 12s. Generally, it's 7 to 7. I run 3 shifts. It's 7 to 7, 7 to 11, then 11 to 7 in the morning again. So we stagger the shifts. And there was a few of those shifts that are staggered. So what we'll do is we'll run 3 people up until about 10 at night. So during the day, we're heavily staffed. We got a cook. You have your main administrator, resident care director, 3 aides on the floor. Your cook, mentioned again, housekeeper. I mean, you got people buzzing all over the building. And when you're talking about a facility like mine, which I believe we're at 21 residents right now, and you got 6 or 8 people at any given time, especially when I'm in there around, that's 2-3 residents per caregiver.
And that's not typical, Rob.
Right. Yeah.
Working in this industry and
Right.
being around a lot of places at night, if there's one thing I can tell a family member who is touring a facility to make a decision on their loved one, go at night and check and see how many people actually work there. That is the best way to make a good decision about where to put your loved one.
You're exactly right. And we stagger it down. So that second shift, we'll have an in-between person that'll hang out till, I believe it's 9 or 10 most of the time. So we'll have the supervisor, 2 aides, and that person that kind of staggers. And then when they leave in the middle of the night, we're down to a supervisor and two aides on the floor.
Important information.
Right.
We never have enough time, so I don't mean to cut you off on this topic, but I do want to get to the legislation in Georgia, because it is important.
Okay.
Because one of the topics we need to talk about is, what is the move-out criteria? Can these folks get placed? Because it's so difficult to put your loved one in a facility other than their home. And when you do, that becomes their home.
Right.
The last thing I would want is to have to move my loved one yet again when they got worse.
Right.
And so can we talk, we only have about 3 or 4 minutes, if we can make it a short,
Yes.
clear answer, about the legislation, the impact, and some good questions people can ask about that.
Well, last year they passed the laws. At the time, it was the most sweeping changes that govern assisted living since the mid-'90s. I think it was 16 years. The idea was aging in place. I'm a huge proponent of aging in place. If a community or facility can demonstrate that they can take care of your loved one, and it's not medical care, it's just ADLs, activities of daily living they're helping out with, I believe they should be able to stay. And in fact, most people in my industry believe they should stay. So what they did is they passed a set of laws that try to encourage that. What we found is it hasn't worked at all. And in fact, the way these are being interpreted by state inspectors and talking to other facilities, I think more people have been requested by the state to be moved out, even though they're appropriate, than before. And I've
seen this impact talking to a lot of folks in the assisted living and personal care industry.
And I take complete issue with that because these laws were supposed to allow people to stay in their home. And if you want to make a state inspector upset, which I've done that, ask them, if you fell and broke your hip and you had mobility issues in your home, how would you like it if I came in as an employee of the state of Georgia and told you couldn't live there anymore? Well, generally I get a blank stare and then the subject is changed. And that is exactly what's happening in these facilities, and it's sad. I understand mobility issues are going to happen. I am a certified memory care community. One of the issues of Alzheimer's advanced stages is mobility is lost. And the reason why is because the brain loses that cognitive function to tell the body how to move around. Okay, so gaits become unsteady and eventually they're in a wheelchair. Even though they're physically strong enough, it's a mental disorder. So if I'm a certified memory care community and we know that that's an issue in memory care, why would somebody be forced to leave when that happens?
Because we know that's going to happen.
Yeah, and that's a question I ask, and I pray that there's somebody that works for the state that's going to listen to this that'll hear it.
So what can a family do when they're making a decision on where to put a loved one to help choose the facility where the loved one's going to be able to live?
Well, one of the things you got to do is if they have memory care issues, they need to be in a memory care facility. If they're pretty mobile, fine. Find a great community that matches with their personality. If they're very social and active, I would focus on activities, social. Take a look at the other residents. Are they very active, moving around? Are they talking, playing games, playing cards, stuff like that? That might be a better match for your loved one.
And in the meantime, you and I and people in the industry will continue to work and advocate for these.
Exactly.
folks.
That's the key word, advocate. And it has to be the family members have to be involved with the facilities. The reason why I say that is you're in my facility and state comes in and says, you got to move out. But I know that they're perfectly appropriate to stay. You know they're perfectly appropriate to stay. If I go and fight them alone, it's not going to work because they govern me. But if you go as an outside third party and as somebody that can pull on the hearts and minds and can get into the pockets of the or not the pockets, but in the minds of the politicians, well, maybe the pockets will work, I don't know, but in the minds of the politicians, then a lot of times there can be a solution
will be better
that'll work.
Off. Right. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. Again, this is Mr. Robert Ortega with Southern Pines Assisted Living Facility in Maysville, Georgia. Great information, never enough time. I hope you learned a lot and you're prepared for that tour that you're going to take. And if you have further questions, you can contact Rob at Southern Pines Assisted Living.
Yep, at 706-652-2600. Thank you for having me.
I'm Jeannie Pete. Thanks for listening. Have a blessed day and week ahead. And listen here, same time next week and every week. Homestead Hope Foundation is your resource for a healthy life. God bless.